Hey Kate, I'm so sorry. I recorded the class when I taught it this morning, and I don't know if I hit a wrong button. I don't know what I did, but the recording never came to me. So thought I'd wait, and it would come to me later. Maybe it was taking a while to process, and I see nothing. So I'm recording for you now, which actually probably works out better because we had interactive slides going on. So it would have just been you watching them and probably not getting much out of that part. So I'll just walk through the class real quick. So we talked about today we're introducing podcasts and having our virtual class, and then you have the 22nd through 28th to do the classroom activities, and then the final class is on the 29th. And here everybody responded with any experience they have with podcasts, and we did a Nearpod bulletin board with that. I told them a little bit about the history of podcasts, how they were first mentioned in 2004, and people were watching them on their iPads, and it's a broadcast on the iPod, so it ended up being a podcast. And we talked about how people referred to podcasts a lot of times, whether they're audio or video, so like a TED Talk, even though it's a video, is often a podcast. And anyone can make podcasts. There's all sorts of venues that host podcasts, some very popular, some not so popular, and anyone can produce one. Then I took a poll to see what people's goals were for the class, the two most important. So you could take a look at those and maybe pause and decide which ones are most important to you. And if you really get into doing podcasts with your kids and things of that nature, or you might just end up listening to them, but if you end up getting involved more in podcasts and have your kids creating them, you would definitely want to look up International Podcast Day for the 30th and get your kids involved in that. And we talked about the type of podcasts, one-to-one interviews, which are usually very popular. Solo commentary a little bit, not so much. You got to have the gift of gab and shooting from the hip to be able to do that. Panels are very popular. And nonfiction and fiction storytelling, all very popular. And the mixture of all of these is very common as well. And repurposed content, whether it's sermons, seminars, workshops, you can find all different types of podcasts when you search for them. You can pretty much get a podcast on any electronic device now. Smart TVs, your computer. You can ask your in-home device, if you have an Alexa or whatever you might have, to pull up a certain podcast for you. Tablets, phones. What I recommended for the class, if you're going to follow through and do the hours, is when you choose podcasts to listen to, subscribe to them on your phone and listen to them in your car. This way you're not giving up time in your home when you should be getting something done or visiting with friends or whatever to listen to podcasts. And your car is really a great time to listen to them. Then we talked about some of the different venues in which you could listen to podcasts and just seeing which ones you're familiar with. So you can pause and take a look at these. Some are more popular than others. This is a sample podcast if you want to, once you're in the classroom, take a look and click on this. But this was more so to talk about what do you do with a podcast for your students. So once you find it, you should listen to it first. And then you need to find a way to embed it either into a Google Doc or your Google Classroom or a Nearpod or whatever way you're having your students listen to it. You want to have them you want to have them access it by embedding the link to the podcast somewhere where they can reach it. I suggest creating and using a doc, but this is a slide from years ago when I first started teaching this class. Now we have all sorts of mediums in which you could embed the link. This is our Google Classroom code. We'll look at that in a minute, and I'll show you the code again, so don't go crazy writing it down right now. There's a whole bunch of information there that I'll show you. How can you use podcasts as a teacher? You could use them as a teaching tool to study within your content area. You can improve student listening skills. You remember, Kate, all of the different listening activities we used to do for ELA and for the state tests and things of that nature, and those have kind of been pushed aside. Note-taking has been pushed aside and filled in with other things in a lot of ways. Anything that kids would listen to and take notes or need to give back information is important, and the podcast can help with that. Enhance a topic, prepare your students to create their own podcasts, which is a lot of fun. Teach better ways to use their devices is a good one. Kids today use their devices for all sorts of stuff, but not necessarily as a learning tool. They don't even really know what's available to them in that respect. So if you have a kid who's a swimmer or a musician or into a certain sport, there's all sorts of podcasts out there for them that they might become interested in. To collaborate on projects, so you could have your class listen to a podcast, and then from there, kids could meet in groups and answer questions or design something, a Google slide, with information that they learn in the podcast and things of that nature. School announcements is a good one. And teachers can create podcasts to teach. Outside of school, you can listen to news and current events, meditate or relax. And I have this twice. I realize that. Long car rides. And I can't sleep a lot in the middle of the night, so I use various podcasts to help me fall asleep. I search for those. These are some of my favorite podcasts, and I'll just explain it real quick. Wow in the World has some really cool facts, sciencey kind of things, usually that you can listen to. How I Built This is awesome. It talks about how certain businesses are built, so like Airbnb, Spanx, anything you can think of, like everyday items. It tells how they came about, and the stories are amazing. Sleep With Me, I know it sounds funny, but that's a good one to get you to sleep. The guy tells really boring stories to help you fall asleep. Wait, Don't Tell Me is just a really fun podcast. It's a really funny guy who tells different stories and then embeds trivia games throughout his podcast. He has special guests on. It's a lot of fun. And Deep Energy 2.0 is more meditative, relaxing kind of podcast. So I just want to show you a variety. When you're preparing a podcast for your students, you want to read the summary just like a book. This is just a few ideas. Choose vocabulary words. You want to do something before you share it with the kids. It's going to help the kids pay attention as they're listening. So if you have a sheet with questions, or if you're having them listening with their headphones on, you could have a bunch of questions on the front board for them to kind of keep an ear out for as they're listening. You want to keep your podcast short. Or if it's a long podcast the kids are listening to, break it up into short stints, because we know how their attention span is. You can do writing activities after the kids listen or while they're listening, taking notes, to introduce or enhance a new topic, for them to hear current events, or to work on a variety of listening skills. There are all sorts of things you could do with a podcast. You just have to think out of the box. You can look online and get ideas, but there's a few things here. Just like when you teach the elements of a book, the different parts of a book and why they're there are elements of a podcast. So there's different types of animation involved in podcasts. There's often a summary in the beginning. The music will definitely tell you what kind of podcast you're about to listen to. There's a warm-up and a wrap-up in the beginning and the end. And length and timing is one of the elements of a podcast. One of the more popular podcasts that people use, at least in Three Village, is 6 Minutes. And it's like a suspenseful mystery type of podcast. So you hear maybe doors creak or open and close and waves in the background. The music definitely lets you know exactly what kind of podcast you're going to listen to. So that's one that a lot of teachers in our district use. If you want to check out 6 Minutes, each episode is 6 minutes. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to skip that for now. Oh, nope, I needed to go back to that. Sorry. So you're going to find 3 podcasts. I'm going to explain more of that in the Google Classroom. You're going to create something as part of a project, and we have a shared folder where you're going to place your creations. So let me bring up our Google Classroom. All right. And we talked a lot about how great podcasts are, Kate. We talked about how this is a very laid back class. And whether you find a podcast to use with your students, whether you find a podcast to use personally for yourself, that gives you some downtime to make you a better person when you enter that classroom and relieve some stress or whatever you need. It's up to you to do your final project on the kind of podcast you want to do your project on. So this is the Nearpod activity that I just walked through. If you want to look at that again, there's an article here for you to read, and you could just make a couple of comments. Some of your classmates already did. Real quick couple of sentences. Then you're going to find a podcast for your students. Once you find a podcast for your students, you can put your name, title, the link, and again, nothing crazy, 2 to 3 sentences explaining why you chose this podcast for your students. Then a podcast for you. And there's a Google form here for you to fill out. I'm just doing different things to show you what you can do with your students. So if you want to have your kids answer questions about a podcast in a Google form, go for it after they listen, or you can have them chart. Obviously, you're not just going to have them do something as simple as this, but maybe each of these columns would be a question that they have to answer. That was the whole point of me really doing this. And then a podcast for teachers, where you learn about the teaching profession in some way. This is one that I chose, Truth for Teachers. I put my name on a slide. I ended up putting an image here, and it's linked to the podcast. Oops, sorry about that. There's a link here to get to the podcast and just a brief description of it. Some of your classmates, your colleagues are already jumping on and creating their slides. This is one that I recommended. It's so great, this SmartLess. I'll show you this in a minute, but Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett, a lot of fun. They interview a variety of people, and it's just a good time, something relaxing to listen to in the car. And so you would grab a slide here. Whoops, 3 Villages calling. So let me get back to that. They're calling about the COVID virus, I think, picking up in these summer camps. So yeah, you would go on and create your slide here. And then the final project, you take one of the podcasts that you used here. Anyone, does not have to be something you're using with your kids. And you're going to create something, anything, using 3 Village technology to share your podcast or to express the meaning of it. And you've got to include 5 things, whether it's images, links, words, whatever, to tell all about your podcast. And you put the link for the project you create in our shared folder here. So you could click here, and you see 2 people have already done it. If you need help getting it into the shared folder, that's what I'm here for. And I put 3 examples here. Okay, so the first one, I created a Google slide. Dolly Parton's Dolly World podcast is awesome. I feel like I grew up with Dolly Parton, knowing who she was, and kind of made a judgment, maybe based on the way she looked, without knowing anything about her. And when you listen to this podcast, you learn that she was one of 12 kids. So I put the number 12 here. She grew up with these 12 people in this teeny, teeny, tiny house. She was very persistent. And isn't it terrible? I can't read this word. I don't have my glasses on. Let me see if I go like this, the font. Oh, and she was a dreamer. So she was a persistent dreamer. And she had to work very hard because she did not have a lot of opportunity, and became an incredible singer. She worked through a lot of ups and downs in her life. I chose this microphone because she's such a glitzy, glamorous lady. And I thought that would be like some kind of microphone that she would choose to use. And I love this picture of her. I know she always outdoes herself and looks so gorgeous, but I thought this was a very natural looking Dolly Parton. I think she looks so pretty there. And I chose one of her songs that I put here. How Tough Are You? What this reminded me of when she was a girl, she hopped a fence. One of the stories they told about her, and like piece of glass, she landed on the other side when she jumped the fence. Totally cut her foot like crazy. And where we would have dragged our kids to the emergency room as fast as we could, her parents like dumped some whiskey on it and literally sewed her foot with a needle and thread. So when you see this glitzy, glamorous woman on TV, that's not how you expect for her to have been brought up and lived her life. So I thought that that was really cool. She also helps people a lot. She obviously did not grow up with a lot and had to work very hard for where she is now. And she provides a lot of opportunities for people who do not have a lot. So she has a foundation that gives books to impoverished kids. She's offered scholarships. She's helped out in areas where there have been natural disasters and things of that nature. So I chose this picture, and it's not linked, but if you know how to link things, I also took this image of the Dolly World Foundation and linked it to the foundation, where you can click on links from here and learn more about her foundation and things of that nature. So this was one idea. Again, I told you 5 things, so you don't have to do all of this. It could be 5 or more. The reason you might want to outdo yourself and have a lot of stuff is if you're going to do a podcast with your kids and you want an activity for them to do an activity like this, now's a good time to create an example. Now, I would use Dolly Parton as an example for my students because this is not a podcast I would be doing with them, and it would just give them the ideas for whatever podcast I'm working on with them without me giving them exactly what they should do. You know what I'm saying? So if we were doing 6 minutes, I wouldn't want to do 6 minutes on here because then they would likely just copy what I did. Another option is a Flipgrid. So here, I created a Flipgrid as a teacher. So this is me talking about the Dolly Parton podcast and showing an example of how you could speak about a podcast. And using Flipgrid to do this is a great idea because the kids could listen to a podcast. You could guide them with questions or note-taking opportunities, and then they could respond here in the Flipgrid with whatever it is you're looking for them to respond with. So they would have an example by you, and their responses would go down here. So if you're familiar with Flipgrid, you could create a Flipgrid for this class. If you're not familiar and you want to learn about it, you can reach out to me and I'll help you with that. But you can check out this example as well. And the last example I did was with Padlet, but I can't access it without going to Padlet. Okay, so here I am. And the Padlet that I created is this. So I chose this background because I thought it looked foresty and woodsy, like where she might have grown up. And I put the title Dolly's Early Life. Songs you may not know were written by Dolly. A link to her podcast is the other title. And Dolly Parton's Giving Ways. And I could have gone on and on here. So here's Dolly's hometown. There's a picture. And Sevierville, Tennessee. I put a link so you could learn about the area. I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston was something Dolly Parton wrote. And Jolene, there's so many famous singers that sang Jolene, but it was originally written by Dolly. If you want to listen to her podcast, again, I highly recommend it. You can link here. And then Dolly's Giving Ways. This is a timeline of her, things that she's done over time to show she's a giving person. And then if you click here, it takes you to that foundation again. Padlet is super easy, by the way. You just go click on this plus sign, give it a title, and then from there you can upload something from your computer, add a link, bring in some sort of image with the camera, or go to these 3 dots and do all sorts of things here that you could choose from. Okay. So if you want to do a Padlet, you're welcome to do that. You're not limited to these things that I'm showing you. You could do a Nearpod, you could do a Pear Deck, anything you want that you are interested in. Before you get started, there's some materials to review here, but I also give you a lot of options. There's Wow in the World Again. Here's a Civil War podcast. Unusual Things in History. I already mentioned 6 Minutes, fun history facts. Here's some TED Talks, and those are for teachers and students, depending on the topic. Some personal podcasts that I've listened to. The Daily is great, quick news. I can't handle the news on TV. It never makes me feel good. But if I want to catch up and just get to know what's going on in the world, The Daily is great. Sleep meditation for teachers and students. If you need kids who could benefit from that, and we all know teachers can. Wait, don't tell me I already mentioned. Serial's one of those smutty kind of murder mystery podcasts. Again, no shame in listening to those. Get to turn your brain off and listen to some gripping stories that are hard to turn off. Great for the car rides. Smartless I showed you, that was the one with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett. How I Built This, I mentioned already. In 30 for 30 is sports. It's just the idea that there's so much out there, and I'm not even touching on all of the different topics in podcasts. And then professional podcasts. They have very serious ones. They have quick 10-minute teacher podcasts. They have teachers who drink. So there's a lot of teacher podcasts out there that are funny. You are welcome to use any of these if they sound interesting, or you're welcome to go on and find your own. Just have fun with it, Kate. Look for things that are in interest to you, that are enjoyable. Try to create a final project that's something, again, that you can model for your kids, because you may want to do something like that with your kids. Make the best of whatever time you have when you're creating here. But again, it's very laid back. If you don't have time to complete these activities, please let me know, and I can give you an extension. I'm here. So I have to do hours too for this class. So please reach out to me, ask me questions. I can meet with you on a meet. I can answer an email, whatever works. So it's a little bit of a weird energy not having any people here to talk to. So I hope you enjoyed hearing me here. I'm trying to think if the classroom code. Let me show you that one more time. It's here. So you can get all the materials in the classroom. And again, I'm here if you need anything. All right. Take care, Kate.